We are here right now as a result of the survivors of all what we just talked about. Could you imagine what kind of resilience it took for them to make it through all of that? Stomachs ripped open, torn apart by horses, tarred and feathered, lynchings, all of these things, and the law calls that a little bit. We are the offspring of the generations that survived.
You know what that is? Ball in the mouth. Branding of captives. Here, the last bath. Merchant and his slaves. This is how they got wealthy off the backs of our people. Got wealthy, not rich. Wealth. Auction of slaves reduced. Maybe they can't get pregnant or something. There you go, old Esau. Enrichment of slaves of the ship. This is what you be showing in the class.
Yeah.
Of course, our people fought, had slave rebellion, even at the castle. Freeing of slaves. Emancipation Declaration. AKA colonialism is up next.
So my name is Kwame Divine.
Okay.
Kwame Divine. Yes, sir. And I'm going to be your guide here at the Asemanso Ancestral Riverside, a place where the ancestors who were held in captivity in their chains and shackles had their last bath before they were sold to buyers to be taken to the dungeons. Eventually, they were shipped out of the land to the New World. A very long time ago, before the arrival of the Europeans onto this continent, we lived among each other on a very big, vast land. The oldest known name of the land or the continent was Akebuland. The word Akebuland means land of humanity, mother of all creation. Some calls it the Garden of Eden. Looking around the entire continent, Africa, we are blessed with so much resources. But then as Africans, we are struggling to use our own resources. It has always been our problem. And that has been the advantage the Europeans have had over us. Centuries before the arrival of the Europeans, we among us has fought for territorial expansions. We had victims of wars. The victims, though, were never enslaved. Rather, they were brought into the communities. They inducted them into various cultures, and they practiced a system called indentured servitude, which was no one was in chains and shackles. But then nearer to the year 1400s, we had the Europeans sailing across oceans. They called that particular era exploration stages. They came into contact with the land, the continent, and they changed the name from Akebuland to Africa. The word Africa was derived from a Latin word Africa, which literally means sunny. And then the Greek word Afrik, spelled A-P-H-R-I-K-E, that word means a land without cold. Judging from the look of things, Africa, we know we have a lot of sunshine, and that's what the land needs to flourish, or for the vegetations to look good. When these people came here, they changed the name and all of that. They started sailing across ocean, making contact with the various parts of the continent. They came into this land 1471. Led by Prince Henry the Navigator, the Portuguese got to this particular land, traded with our people. Initially, they were on their ships coming into the land, getting foodstuffs and other things and going back to the ships. But then a time came, in 1482, they requested for a land to build their very first castle or fortress. At the Edina Elmina, they built the very first castle called St. George's Castle. After completing it, they went into trade with our people. Extensively, gold, ivory, pepper, spices. But then, nearer to the year 1500s, that was when the Europeans got to the West Indies and then the Americas. Around Massachusetts and its environs, they formed the New England, and they were using the natives of that land on their plantations as slaves, free labor. But it came to a time the people were not doing well. And that was when one of their people called Bartolomeo de las Casas a Spanish, Portuguese, Roman Catholic priest, came up with a suggestion that looking at the Africans across the oceans, they look strong, a lot more stronger than the natives of America. So let's go to Africa and get them. So when he sold the idea to them, many of them bought into the idea. So they started sailing across oceans. Among the sailors who came here, the traders, was Don Diego de Azambuja. They got to this particular land. Prince Henry and his people were here. They built the dungeons or the castle at El Dina in Elmina. Many people, when you ask why they built the very first castle, they said it's for trade in gold, ivory, pepper, spices. And then my question is, if I need to build a structure to produce maybe this fabric or shirt, and I'm given this particular land, would I spend a portion of the land to build prisons? What are dungeons for? They are to imprison people, torture them, without people outside knowing. So why did you have that if you needed a place to trade in gold and ivory and pepper? Then people look at me weirdly. Yes, I know what I'm talking about. You see, when they got here too, Prince Henry had arrived here with a lot of ships. When they decided to move our ancestors, our ancestors out of this land, they never had to change their ships or all the things that they came here with, already geared towards that. So I asked these two questions in a class. My professor got a little bit furious with me because I was asking too much questions. And then he tried to punish me. The punishment he gave me was actually to enlighten me more on the topic that I'm trying to find answers to. He gave me a topic that was to read on a topic which is the sub-Saharan Arab slave trade. Nearly 700 years before the arrival of the Europeans onto this continent, the Arabs were here. In the 7th century, all through to the 19th century, they were here before the arrival. It was when the Europeans started coming that they started fading off. But they were here, moved our ancestors in shackles across the Saharan desert into this new world, into the Arab nations to build their nations. So very much aware, the Europeans were aware of this. So then they needed to get a piece of what the Arabs were getting. So when they were coming, all their ships, all their plans, any structure they built on this particular continent were geared towards slavery. And that's why they built the very first trading post, which is the castle with dungeons at the bottom of it. They have their ships there. None of the books ever stated they reconstructed the ships before moving our ancestors. Why not? Because they have everything planned. When they came here, first group of people who got here couldn't go into the system with their trade because the system we had here was too massive for them to penetrate through. That was indentured servitude. But they got away. When they got to know our ancestors, it was through manipulation and deceit that they got them to believe that, look, having these warriors who were victims to your battles, you captured them, brought them into your land, now you set them free. Don't you think if they are closer to your people, they get to know more about them in terms of their strengths and weaknesses? They get to know more and they will fight back. If they fight, there is nothing you can do. Let us help you out. We came with a lot of weapons. The guns and gunpowders are at our disposal. We would like to provide you with some. Protect your land. In return, you shall pay us. The payment they requested for was that the victims of wars be given to them so that they can go use on their plantations. At this point, I am forced to call my own ancestors naive because they believe strangers over their own people. I believe naivety took the best out of them. How would you be on this land for centuries with people who had never attempted to fight against you, and then somebody walked in telling you that, oh, this is what we saw, and then you believe the people? And so when they gave them the guns and gunpowders, they requested for you to give them the victims of wars. Now you gave them. And when they are saying we sold each other, we said we don't. We did it. We did. You see, in transaction, I believe in three things: the proposal, the agreement, and the exchange. These three things were executed. In terms of when they told the ancestors they would give them guns and gunpowders for them to give them the victims of wars, that's a proposal. They considered it and agreed to the terms and conditions. Now you give them the victims of wars, took guns and gunpowders in return, exchange. So what are you talking about? I believe we strongly dissold our brothers and sisters. But then, for a couple of decades, they were relying their very first source of slaves on the victims of wars. Sometimes I tend to come into the defense of my ancestors. By forcing, I get to believe that maybe thinking that the same system we have here is the same out there, they handed their brothers and sisters out. But then you didn't know. So why would you do that? for a couple of decades, nearer to the 1600s. That was when the Europeans started coming here in their numbers, in large numbers. The Dutch, the Danish, the Spanish, the British, the French sailed across oceans, and when they got here, they had to fight each other. For nearly 130 years, they've been fighting each other for a position because the Portuguese were the first here. They don't want anyone to get in contact with the people directly. You have to come through me. But the rest don't want it, so they had to fight. After 1651, the British took over, and they introduced raiding, kidnapping, ambushing, burning homes and forcing families into chains and shackles. They were made to walk for so many miles. A historian here in Ghana called Akosia Adoma Pebi, professor of the University of Ghana, Legon, in her book entitled The History of Indigenous Slavery in Ghana from the 15th century to the 19th century, she made us aware that many slave markets were used here on this continent, right from Benin to through to Burkina Faso, all the way to Gambia. Gold Coast, Ghana had about 63 slave markets. We have Salaga, Sampa, Jenani, Ketekrache, Bonomanso, Techiman, Picoro, Asemanso, the dungeon at Cape Coast, Elmina, Fort Amsterdam, Fort Williams, all the way to the Christiansburg dungeon in Osu, Accra, just to mention, but a few being used as slave markets. These are very few. There was a British historian who was also traveling. During that same era, he kept a travel journal entitled The Short History of Gold Coast. In that book, he emphasized that all the slave markets that I've mentioned were functional. Two of them were playing historical roles, Asemanso and that of the Salaga slave market. When you look at the Ghana map, we are talking about the top to the bottom. Asemanso is here. Salaga is all the way up there. Not all of them were even captured from Gold Coast, Ghana. So many of them were captured from Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, all the way north. So they had to walk to cover the journey. They went through the Mole National Park. There, so many of the animals were attacking their ancestors. The captors thought their commodities were getting lost. So the way to protect them was to sacrifice the same commodities. So they went looking into the chains and shackles, pulling the weaker ones up, walked them for a couple of meters, then they tied them to trees. Their backs were whipped. The blood that oozed out of them got the animals attracted, and whilst the animals were feeding on them, they got the rest out of the pack. They succeeded, but lives were lost. They met a river called the Pra River. To cross that river, lots of our ancestors got drowned there, and they were buried just at the bank of the river. The women couldn't bear the treatment. Aside them being raped, they were subjected to two treatments because they were crying out loud. The stone treatment and the metal mask treatment. They forced stones into their mouth and then had it tied around their necks. If they wouldn't use that, they would gather leaves, stuff it in there before covering it up with the metal mask. That way you get to shed tears. Nobody hears your voice. They arrived here so hungry, dirty, skinny, and very, very tired. It was here that they saw the need for them to be fed, not because they were hungry. They had to feed them because they were looking too skinny. No buyer wants such a person. Whilst feeding them, they were looking among them in the chains and shackles, especially those men with their hairs and beards bushy. They were being shaved off with broken bottles and knives. After that, they would then force their mouth open. With the device called speculum oris, they will count their teeth. That way they get to know how old they were. Then they will move them accordingly, section them out, sort them out, before taking them to the river for their final bath. And then let me tell you about the ancestral graveyard. Crystal was a native. All the way from this land, they took her to Jamaica. They got to Jamaica and she wouldn't eat anything. Embarking on a hunger strike, she was caught in the act. They needed to force her to eat, so they used the chisel and hammer method on her. Her jaws were tightly closed, so they knocked the teeth out, placed the funnel through, get the food into the funnel. With water, they push it down the throat. That way she stayed alive for them not to lose their money. But she was a strong woman from this land. So when she was fed, she will always wait until they have left. She put the fingers in the throat and throws everything up. Continued and died in the process. Her dying wish was to be brought back home. Centuries of preserving the remains of this woman. They brought it back in 1998 together with the remains of Samuel Carson. Carson was one of the very first group of African Americans to serve in the U.S. Navy. Died and wasn't given a befitting burial. His nephew Sonny Carson, an army officer, also a Pan-African, decided to bring the remains of his uncle back. In 1998, the two of them were flown into this land. They got to the airport, they were picked on a bus. On their way to the dungeon at Cape Coast, they got to the town called Abanzi. The road was blocked. The youth of the town told the leaders that none of these ancestors left here on buses. They were never in an airplane. If you need to bring them back, you should have shipped their remains back the same way they left. And since they didn't do that, they gave them a boat. They picked the remains on it across the ocean. They got to the dungeon. They got there, and the door called Door of No Return was locked. The ancestors needed to pave way for themselves. So the youth in front had to manage to open the door, get the remains through, and got them into the dungeon. That's how come they created the name on that door called a door of return. Meaning now Africans all across the globe, time has come for us to return back to our roots. 2019, the remains of some ancestors from Barbados were brought back home. That year marked exactly 400 years of African resiliency. Since the very first documented slave ship docked in U.S. Virginia, our ancestors have endured a lot there. So between 1619 to 2019, we marked the 400 years of African resiliency. On these walls, we have so many pictures of our ancestors. The freedom fighters like Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Martin Luther King Jr., Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, W.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, and the likes are on this wall. These are people who set the pace for us in terms of freedom fighting. These are the few that we decided to put on the wall. So we call the wall the ancestral wall. From here, we shall take the walk to the river where they had their last fight. So please, come with me. You're welcome, sir. We shall be taking the walk through the ancestral river park all the way to the river. If you look through, you could see that we have a wider path. The ancestors walked through this particular entire space, typical dense forest, not in shoes, almost naked, walking through the forest, so much plants that pass through their bodies or get them cut all over their bodies. We have so many of them. We don't have to put our brothers and sisters coming all the way from the States and all over the diaspora to this place. We don't have to take them through the same thing that the ancestors went through. So then the path has been created a little bit wider so that when they decide to walk through, they feel comfortable and then be able to ask questions and then get themselves reflecting on their own life in general. One question that I always ask them to ask themselves is that, if the ancestors in their chains and shackles, who were forced out of this land across the oceans, hadn't survived the journey, where would we be?
That's right. That's exactly correct.
And once you ask yourself this question, a whole lot of things will come into your mind. You realize that all your achievements up until now, if they hadn't offered you their laps for you to sit on, if they hadn't offered you their shoulders for you to stand on to get to the heights that you are now, you will be nobody.
Absolutely.
So once you ask yourself this question, a whole lot of things will come into your mind. That will be your prayer topic.
Bishop, what you thinking?
a lot of things. It's just like we were speaking earlier, watch that something. You know, it's one thing to read about it in a book or watch a video on television. But it is until you actually come down here and breathe in the same air that our fathers breathed in. And go down and have no idea where you're going. That's just torture in itself. You don't even know where you're going. You know, we're here revisiting. So we have an idea as the children of those who didn't know where they were going. And it's still psychologically painful. And just imagine not knowing anything. And you're being dragged down here, whipped, pushed, shoved, families torn apart, wives destroyed, sons, everything disrupted. That's what I'm thinking.
We have two rivers right here. There is a river coming from my right hand side, all the way from the top there. And that river is called the Enonkoisio. It flows gently to meet with the other river called the Ochi River. Ochi is what is making the loudest noise here. It flows very fast. So the way it flows is why they gave the name Ochi, because it means something that will grab. The ancestors were not allowed to go into the Ochi because the captors were scared. If they allow them there, they will get washed away and they will lose everything. So they kept them on this side of the river in the chains and shackles, with a round metal ball added to the chains around their ankles to go into the river with. That chain and the ball was to hold them still from and preventing them from escaping. The ancestors went there with wrist shackles and all that. They couldn't bathe themselves up. How they do them, like clean themselves? How do you expect them? So what the ancestors were doing was to help each other. I get you clean the next person clean the other person. Until everyone gets cleansed. They saw them and they thought they were trying to console each other, or probably plot for an escape by taking off the chains. So they got them separated. After the separations, they cut the bamboos long enough with the leaves of this bamboo. They use it as a form of brush to wash them. Washing them with the bamboos left them with bruises all over their bodies. After they were bruised, they got them out, lined them up here, allowed them to get dry. After they got dry, they applied shea butter or palm kernel oil on their skins for them to look more presentable and attractive for the buyers to come here. Those various buyers who arrived here were with a very long handled tools. They leave it in the fire, go select whoever they want to select, and after selection, they will take them to the trees and chain them to those trees before branding their backs and their body. I mean, from the waistline upwards, they go ahead and brand you wherever they want. After branding them, they will then go ahead and walk them to the dungeons. We are talking about 70 to 80 kilometers from here. Those who were left in the chains here were considered useless commodities. Every single one of them was shot, killed, and dumped all around.
But this is surreal. You know, we're here, but like I said, just trying to imagine all of this and not knowing what the next step was.
So they selling hard old bread, a big loaf of hard old bread, American flag on the window, white Jesus on the back, right? Our people are left to sell peanuts off their heads, plantain chips off your heads. Meanwhile, this land has gold, diamonds, cocoa, bauxite, aluminum, all types of riches, and our people are left to sell plantain chips off the side of their heads and live like this. Look at this. You left to sell shit on the side of the road. Meanwhile, the white man come and rape all your resources. So you're right. Okay. Yeah, that's coming. Damn, everybody's right here next to it. Like no big deal.
This is where our foremothers and forefathers were dragged down here. And inside this castle, this is where our forefathers and foremothers were forced to get on the ships. I imagine that these dock areas, this right here, is where we ended up being sailed away from this. One go in here and see what we could absorb spiritually so that we could bring some of this history in real life to our brothers and sisters back in the States and all over the world, perhaps. Shalom, Israel. Now we just walk in.
Yeah. Look at this. Thomas Sankara, Jerry Rawlings, Patrice Lumumba, Frederick Douglass, Williams, Malcolm, Marcus. We were in the courtyard of the slave castle. About people coming to the Americas, North, Central, South America. From the Elmina Castle, they came here. They were brought here, sailed across the Atlantic on planks of wood, on trips from 90 months, 90 to 100 days, excuse me, across the Atlantic Ocean. Lord in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68 told us that He's going to bring us into a land, the new Egypt, and be sold, and there you shall be sold into your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no one's going to be able to stop it. That's what the Lord said. Wow.
My name is Justice Kwabena Aqua, and today I'm going to lead you through this experience. And most of the time I prefer to call this an experience, not a tour, because this is not something you make fun of or you laugh about, because we are standing on sacred ground. You know, crime was committed against humanity here, so it's more of reflection and you learning from the past. Right, so briefly I'll give you something about this structure. The British built it 1665 and called it Cape Coast Castle. But to me, in actual sense, this is more of a fort or a dungeon. But the British called it Cape Coast Castle. This structure is over 358 years plus. And historically, this is the third one the Europeans constructed along the coast of Ghana. 12 kilometers west from here, we have another one called Elmina Castle or St. George's Castle. That one was Portugal, 1482. That one is almost 200 years older than Cape Coast Castle, Cape Coast Dungeon. We have the other one in Accra called Christiansborg Castle, and that one was Denmark, 1661. So we have 3 well-preserved castles and over 20 forts. It is actually estimated that West Africa had about 50 of them, and out of that 50, Ghana had over 40 of them. So Ghana had about over 80% of all the castles and forts West Africa had. And so you would wonder why Ghana had that much. Ghana had that much as a result of gold. Gold attracted the white man here around the 14th century and nothing else, because he heard that there was so much gold south of the Sahara. Let me speak briefly about the Mali Empire. When I talk about the Mali Empire, I'm talking about present-day Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Senegal, Chad, part of Nigeria. So look at the size of Mali alone and Mauritania. It tells you that the empire was really vast, and it had Timbuktu to be more like the capital. And around the 14th century, they had an emperor by the name Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa had already established Timbuktu as a center of learning, where he established a university and libraries within Timbuktu. So this is to say that before the Europeans arrived here in sub-Saharan Africa around the 15th century, West Africa or sub-Saharan Africa already had a university. So before the white man came, already this sub-region was training engineers, scientists, mathematicians, astronomers, and all that. Because all the time they tried to relegate us to the fact that we played no role to modern day civilization. First thing we should know is the European did not come to Africa because he loved Africans or he loved Africa. They came to exploit and to basically, let's say it, to basically steal what they didn't have. So 1471 they arrived and constructed those forts, the large ones and the small ones along our coast, and they called Ghana the Gold Coast as a result of the abundance of gold they had here. And when we had independence, the name Gold Coast was changed to Ghana. And behind me we have the male dungeons. And right above the male dungeons was the Church of England. So it sounds very ironic that God was worshipped up there, people died and mourned under the church. So this is also to say that the churches played a vital role in the enslavement of Africans. It was actually the church that invented the whole thing about this human trafficking around the 15th century. And let me start with the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church decreed and accepted that Africans had no souls to be saved. And therefore the African was the best candidate to be enslaved. They were even doing the African a favor, since he or she didn't have any soul to be saved. So rather persecute the African and leave the Indians alone. Replace Africans as labor, leave the Indians alone. So basically that's what the Catholic Church said. Again, the same Catholic Church, the Dutch Reformed Church, and the Church of England also came out with another propaganda that their clergy have studied the Bible so well, and they are fully convinced that Africans are descendant of some cursed characters in the Bible. They mentioned the names. They called Cain African. They called Shem, Ham. All those bad people in the Bible. They attributed them to be Africans, and that the African was supposed to be the white man's slave as a result of the church's propaganda.
Say that again, sir?
So they stayed in here for like 3 months before.
3 months?
Yes, so 3 months was the maximum days. The minimum could be a week to a month. So let's say this, the whole thing would depend on how early or how late the ships arrived. And remember that then, around the 15th, 16th century, the ships had no engines. It depended on the current of the sea. So if the weather was bad, you can imagine you spent so much time on the sea. So it took them 6 weeks or more to reach North America, the Caribbean, the West Indies, another 6 weeks or more returning to Africa. So you would have to stay in for that long wait. So you could imagine 100 to 200 people staying in here for like a week to 3 months. You go to toilet right here, you urinate, you sleep on your toilet and urine for that long. You know, they brought in sand, mud and all that. So these guys were supposed to carry out toilet, vomit, urine, but you ask yourself this question, how many times can toilet, vomit, urine move out? It did not move. So most of the things they left here got stuck up on the floor. Yeah. So we had a carpet of compacted human feces, urine, vomit, covering the actual flooring to this level, all over. So the place was filled up all over with excrement, mud, sand, sweat, tears, pain, agony. We're in the third chamber, we're in the middle chamber. I just want to draw your attention to what is on the floor. Just take a look at the floor. You realize that this floor looks different from the other room. In the other room, you can see the bricks, you can see the gutters were laid out, right? And here you can't actually see them. You can't see them because today we are standing on top of everything they left in these dungeons. So what is on the floor now is compacted human toilet, vomit, urine, blood, tears, saliva, everything they left in these dungeons. And as I mentioned earlier on, this place is a crime scene. And we are doing everything possible to protect the evidence. Because from time to come, somebody will tell you that this did not happen. And when they tell you it did not happen, then you bring them here and show them the evidence of the torture and agony one person was to his fellow human being. So you can imagine how diabolic and barbaric some people were to others. Right above us was the Church of England, or the Anglican Church. So above us, right above this area. This was not the church, but above was a church. Yeah. And that was a peephole. Some of the guards would stand there. So the entrance of that peephole, or that spy hole, is also closer to the entrance of the church. So whoever passed by to worship Yeshua, or Jesus, or God, could smell toilet, vomit, urine, but none of them really, religion did not really care about humanity. And I'm saying this because of the justifications, the malicious and fraudulent justification the churches came about. The Anglican Church, the Dutch Reformed Church, and the Catholic Church came out to justify and condone this evil. Yeah. Out of every 4, 1 died before the ships came. So whatever number they kept in these dungeons, about 25% of them did not survive. 25% of them did not survive. On the ships, it was more than that. By the time they reached North America, the Caribbean, or the West Indies, out of every 4, 2 died. So it's 50%. 50% of them did not survive. So in total, out of every 10 bound to North America, the Caribbean, the West Indies, from Africa during the transatlantic slave trafficking, out of that 10, only 2 or 3 survived. The rest did not survive. So during the entire course of what some people call it the slave trade, and what I call the slave trafficking, those who died outnumbered those who survived. And remember that this continued for over 300 years before it finally came to an end. They had water and food once or twice a day, but the food and water was nothing good to write home about. Something to sustain them for a while till the ships
arrived.
So the two biggest religions here
Yeah.
is Muslim and Christianity.
Christianity
And Christianity
yes.
is brought in here by
Yes,
the
by-
colonizers.
most definitely.
Yeah.
Funny enough, Christianity in Ghana all began from the castles. The Catholic Church would begin from Elmina, Anglican from this right on top of the Mill Sleep Dungeon. Methodist at the courtyard where we'll be going shortly. The Presbyterian, Usu. So Christianity in Ghana would begin from the castles.
Okay. But I was going to say,
Yeah.
when the colonizers brought Christianity here,
Yeah,
they also brought an image of white Jesus.
most definitely.
Right. But as we probably know, or maybe don't know, that Jesus was actually a black.
Yes, I have read something like that.
Yeah. Well, it's going around the world right now.
Yeah,
So if he was black and they were showing you a white Jesus, that's a problem.
most definitely.
Okay.
There's a saying here in Ghana, especially Kipkus, where I come from, that I'll say it in Fanti, then I'll translate to you. I say, going to church and you meet a white man on the way, go back for you've seen God. It is still, how do you even, it is something that we still say in our language here. That if you are going to church and you see a white man, return, go back home because you've seen God. So we have this, some mentality about them, seeing them as gods. That is why I said imperialist mentality.
Right. I understand that part. Rebecca? Did you understand when he was speaking?
Yes, please.
What was he translating?
My Lord,
Yes.
the brother, where he speak more English to explain to us.
Okay. Say that again.
I was saying that if you are going to church
Uh-huh.
and you see the white man on your way,
Right.
just go back home for you seen God. It is one of the things we still see here.
Right.
And that's why I was trying to say that that imperialist mentality had it, and it is still eaten into
Yes.
Ghanaian Africans today.
Yes.
It's more like, for now, currently it has become an adage.
Yeah.
Most
definitely,
most Ghanaians don't go with that. On your way to church, you meet a white
man, yes.
There's no need to continue.
Continue,
to church,
yeah,
and-
because you've seen God.
I kind of broke away. I'm in my own little dungeon right now. Not sure what this place is supposed to be or what it was used for. But I'm in my own little dungeon.
All right, let's see the female dungeon.
Step down.
All right, one step down here, you watch out. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, another dungeon for our female ancestors. We had this one, we had the other one over there. Over 100 to 200 women were squeezed in each of these chambers. And bear in mind that there was a certain age range within these dungeons. The age range was from 12 to 45. And you know why 12 to 45? That's your youthful stage, where labor could be exploited out of you. Because a 12 years old, a 13, 15 years old plus could still pick cotton, pick sugar cane. Filled hands, sort of. 15, 16, 17, you could give back to more people. So think about this. This sub-region for over 300 years was deprived of the strong men and women we needed to build this continent. They were stolen away from here to build continent elsewhere in the United States, the Caribbean, the workers. Trust me, had it been the struggles and the exploitations of our people, how they were, those regions wouldn't have been where they are today. Had it been for Africa's natural resources, some people will never be where they are today, because they always exploit it, they always steal it to their disadvantage. And all I'm saying is, we should be aware of ourselves. We should come together so that they don't steal from us again, so that the little we have, we protect it for our own benefit. Because here is the case, they're always stealing from us. So you come into this dungeon, you find a 12 years old girl, the 13 years, and the sad thing is, they were forced naked in the dungeons. Yes, like, you having an animal, you put the animal in a pen, or you leave the animal to eat, go to the toilet, urinate, That's what they did to people here. So you could imagine a woman having her menstrual period on feces, urine, blood, vomit of other people. You could imagine the infections and the diseases women, had. Again, think about the sexually transmitted diseases also, because our female ancestors here were raped by the Europeans. It did not stop in the dungeon. It continued on the ships. It continued on the plantation farms. So this is what our people endured over the centuries. I mentioned that before the white man and the Arabs came with their religion, like Islam and Christianity, we had our own way of communicating to God. So we were not religious people, but rather we were spiritual people, because what we believed and practiced was not invented by any man. It was inborn, because we have the knowledge that God is nature, nature is God. So there is God in every one of us. So if there is God in you, then what do you have to do? You don't have to hurt your neighbor, right? You don't have to kill, you don't have to. So what I want to tell you today is, it is not the Arab or the European that taught us morality.
This is not the original door, but this is the original exit. And the British did not write anything up there, but the perception, the notion, and the idea was there. That if you go through the store, that was it. It's two things for you. You either die on the way, your remains is thrown into the ocean, or you were forced to the plantation farms where labor was exploited out of you. So today, we shall follow the footsteps of our ancestors, but surely we shall all return. It's a gift. So the ships docked some distance away. At the shore, the captives were placed on boat, and gradually they were forced on the ships. And after they were forced on the ships, they headed west. So that's how come we are saying that when you go through that door, you will not return. But look up again. We have another inscription on the door. It says, Door of Return. We had it in 1998. 1998, for the first time, Ghana celebrated Emancipation Day, or Freedom Day. And when we had the celebration, brothers and sisters all over the diaspora, those in the United States, the Caribbean, the West Indies, North America, Western Europe, many returned. And for the first time, they returned 2 human remains of former enslaved Africans who died in Jamaica and America. So 98, their remains was exhumed. The names are Samuel Carson from US and Crystal from Jamaica. Their remains were placed in casket. The remains was brought back to Cape Coast Castle. We had a ceremony for them inside, and afterwards the 2 remains was buried 60 kilometers from here at a town we call Asin Manso. Asin Manso was infamous as one of the biggest slave market around. And also it had the slave river, where our ancestors took their last bath before they were marched all the way from the interior to the coast. So every year, every August, we celebrate Emancipation Day in Ghana. So through the door of return, we are welcoming our brothers and sisters coming from the diaspora. Go through pain and agony so that it's going to be a lesson to anyone who had the intention of escaping, rebelling or revolting. Because when they were suffocated to death, they made the others know. Right? Like just the plantation farms, when people revolted or tried to escape, you know, in the presence of everyone, your tongue could be chopped off, your feet, and after that, the whole body could be chopped into pieces, right? And they will not leave your body alone. They will fry your body in oil, right? That is what they did to Nat Turner, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, Nat Turner fought for freedom and emancipation to people. They got hold of him and did that. You know, you could be hanged and bent at the same time. But they did worse things to our people. Even up to the 40s and 50s, they were still doing that. Yes. And you know, recently, you know, nothing has really changed, right? You know, they will arrest African Americans for no reason, you know, suffocate them. You know, they are still suffocating us. Right. So that, yes, they're still doing that. All right, let me show you the condemned cell. So we leave you here without water, without food, without air, nothing. And if about 10 or 20 of them were here, they would not mind. They will wait for all of them to die. If the bodies were smelling or rotten or not, they don't really care. They will leave all of them to die. Then they will, yes, they would. Then they will move the bodies out in that smelling state or rotten state and show it to the other captives. Then from there, the bodies was thrown into the sea. Yeah, so this was to put fear in you.
It's demonic.
Yeah, so we say, ancestors, we thank you for freedom and liberation. You were never scared. No matter how you were killed, you fought for freedom, you broke those chains. We thank you. We pray you instill in us that spirit of unity and strength. And wherever you are, we are so trusting. So let's not take it, let's listen back.
The brains of my ancestors that have been worn on my mother's and father's head like a helmet. And everything that we did was up underneath the wicked auspices of that psychological terror and damage that has happened to us. We know that we are in serious need of healing. And we must do it ourselves. If we don't elect to lift ourselves from the mud of slavery, nobody will help us. If we don't elect to be the first to do it, if we don't elect to be the train that's willing to leave the station of stagnation and set the mark, then nobody will help us. We hope that our brothers can join us, but we got to go. Can't wait on the rest of you. We got to do it. And if you are inspired to follow, all praise to the Most High. If I can provoke my brothers and my sisters to emulation, even if they don't fully understand it, just because we're doing it, and they say, well, I don't fully understand what they're doing, but I like the fact that they took initiative. And I'll just follow just to follow until I fully learn the full deal.
Nation is men leading by example.